It was supposed to be a procedural hearing, just another hour in a long week of administrative noise echoing through a federal courtroom. No cameras, no jury, just a handful of staffers, journalists, and a young woman standing alone at the defense table, wearing a navy blue blazer over a plain white tee, slacks, and flats. Her name was Karoline Leavitt. And the courtroom didn't expect much from her, until the judge glanced up and didn't like what he saw. Judge Arnold Breyer, a Clinton-era appointee known for his sharp tongue and even sharper politics, looked down over his glasses and paused mid-sentence. "Miss Leavitt," he said, adjusting his robe with an air of superiority, "I'll ask that you treat these proceedings with the seriousness they deserve. This is not a college debate or cable news segment. Perhaps next time you might consider dressing accordingly." The room went still. Karoline's fingers froze over her notepad. Her attorney looked up sharply, but said nothing. Neither did the prosecutor. Not yet. It wasn't what the judge said. It was how he said it. Like the fabric of her clothing had invalidated the strength of her convictions, like her outfit was somehow louder than her record. Karoline stood, not angry, not flustered, but clear. She stepped forward slowly, both hands on the table, and looked the judge straight in the eye. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I came here dressed in the uniform of the modern American woman, not to impress you, but to remind this court what democracy actually looks like." The gallery blinked. The clerk's pen stopped mid-scratch. Karoline continued, voice even, measured, but unmistakably firm. "You see slacks and flats. I see freedom. You see casual. I see capable. And if the respectability of my arguments depends on the thread count of my blazer, then maybe this court has bigger problems than my clothes." Boom, the gallery shifted. The judge narrowed his eyes. "Miss Leavitt," she raised her hand politely but firmly, "I'm here to speak for those who don't get custom robes and protected platforms. For the young women who get judged before they speak, and the working-class voters whose boots have seen more courtrooms than suits ever will." Silence. She took a breath. "I dressed for them, and I speak for them, and I won't apologize for that." What was supposed to be a quiet, procedural hearing just became a moment. Judge Breyer leaned forward, voice clipped and cool. "Miss Leavitt," he said, "this is a federal courtroom, not a campaign rally. If you wish to make political statements, there are plenty of microphones outside these doors." Karoline didn't flinch. "Respectfully, Your Honor, the only statement I'm making is that decorum should be measured by conduct, not by cotton." A few murmurs rose from the press bench. Breyer wasn't used to pushback, especially not from someone under 30 who wore her convictions like armor and didn't ask permission to be articulate. He tapped his gavel once. "I will not be challenged on the standards of this court." Karoline stepped forward again, her voice unwavering. "Then allow me to reference a precedent, one you set yourself." The judge blinked. "Excuse me?" Karoline pulled a printed page from her binder and handed it to the bailiff. "It's your own 2013 ruling in United States v. Delaney, where you wrote, and I quote, 'A person's appearance, absent disruption or intent to insult the dignity of the court, should never serve as grounds to dismiss or discredit their standing.'" A long pause. The document made its way to the bench. Breyer's eyes scanned it. Karoline stood, poised but unyielding. "So if my outfit today is being used to discredit my arguments, then the court is not following protocol. It's rewriting it." Gasps this time. Real ones. One reporter raised a brow, scribbling furiously. Judge Breyer looked over the paper again, then set it down with care. His voice was lower now. Slower. "You are quite prepared." Karoline nodded once, "Because women like me have had to be. When credentials aren't enough, when confidence gets mistaken for arrogance, and when speaking truth without a tie earns more scrutiny than silence in a suit." She stepped back, not out of retreat, but to let the weight of her words settle where they needed to. In the gallery, at the bench, and in the court of public opinion, which, unbeknownst to the judge, had already started tuning in via live blogs, tweets, and cameras just outside the hall. The moment was no longer local. It was national, and Karoline's outfit was about to become a symbol. The judge called a recess, not because it was scheduled, because he had to. The courtroom buzzed as Karoline returned to her seat. Her team leaned in, whispering, but Karoline said nothing. She just stared forward, calm, still, composed. Outside, however, It wasn't calm at all. The courtroom sketch had already gone viral. A reporter had tweeted it with the caption, "Judge questions Karoline Leavitt's outfit in court." Her reply? Absolutely blistering. The tweet? Over 4 million views in under 30 minutes. Across X, Instagram, and even TikTok, clips from outside the courthouse exploded with hashtags: "What she wore," "Respect over robes," "Karoline Leavitt speaks for us." College students posted side-by-side pics of Karoline's outfit and historic photos of women testifying in Congress, with captions like, "We weren't dressing for fashion, we were dressing for battle." Even high-profile names chimed in. Karoline Leavitt didn't show up underdressed, she showed up overprepared. Candace Owens, this is what courage in flats looks like. Remind me again why women's outfits are still on trial. Meanwhile, the judge's staff scrambled. They hadn't expected pushback. They hadn't expected receipts. And they certainly hadn't expected a generation of women to rally behind Karoline in real time. Outside the courthouse, supporters began gathering. Not for a protest, not even for a rally, for a presence. Young professionals, nurses still in scrubs, moms with toddlers, students in jeans and boots. Many of them wearing plain white shirts and navy blazers, just like Karoline. A symbolic echo of the woman inside who had just reminded the court that power doesn't come from fabric, it comes from fire. Back inside, as Judge Breyer prepared to return to the bench, one of his clerks leaned over and whispered, "Sir, she's trending in 18 countries." He looked up, and for the first time all day, he looked concerned. When Judge Breyer returned to the bench, he wasn't quite the same man who had left it. The robe still hung heavy, the gavel still sat within reach, but the control he thought he held, that was slipping. He cleared his throat. This court, he began, would like to refocus on the matter at hand. Karoline nodded politely, but her gaze didn't waver. "That's what I've been trying to do since I walked in, Your Honor." A few heads turned. Even the stenographer glanced up. Breyer straightened. "Then let us proceed with testimony regarding the speech you delivered at the Community Forum in Manchester, and whether it violated the neutrality expectations for former federal employees." Karoline didn't hesitate. "I'd be happy to clarify that, Your Honor, but first I'd like to put on record that what's being tested here isn't my policy position. It's my permission to speak in public without apologizing for who I am, what I wore, or where I came from." Breyer exhaled slowly. "You are not on trial for your background, Miss Leavitt." "Then why did you bring up my wardrobe before you asked a single legal question?" Silence again. "Because if this courtroom wants to pretend this is about procedure, then let's at least be honest enough to admit when perception gets weaponized against women who don't conform. I walked in prepared to talk policy. You opened with fashion. So forgive me if I insist on addressing both." In the gallery, a few journalists stopped typing. They were just watching now. Judge Breyer looked like he wanted to move on, but the room wasn't ready to let him. And Karoline? She wasn't letting up. This hearing was supposed to be about whether I crossed the line with my words, but the first line that was crossed today was when I was told I looked too casual to be taken seriously. I have one answer to that. If my shoes were quieter than my voice, you weren't listening anyway. That quote, clipped, posted, 9 million views in under an hour. The camera crews outside didn't know what was happening inside, but they knew something had shifted. Because this wasn't about clothes anymore. It was about the courtroom realizing they were no longer judging a witness. They were staring down a movement. Judge Breyer leaned forward again, trying to recover control of the room. "Let's proceed," he said, voice tightening. "Ms. Leavitt, your remarks at the Manchester Forum were viewed by many as partisan. Can you explain how quoting the Constitution in a public event did not violate the Hatch Act restrictions applicable to former federal employees?" Karoline didn't miss a beat. "Absolutely, Your Honor. I read aloud the First and 10th Amendments in response to a question from the audience about states' rights." She paused, letting her gaze move across the gallery. There was no endorsement, no campaign activity, no solicitation, just words, constitutional words, that every public servant should be proud to repeat. Breyer pressed, "Were you aware the event was live-streamed and widely circulated as a political statement?" "Yes," Karoline said, "because in a time when truth is treated like a threat, every truth risks becoming political." But quoting the Constitution isn't political, it's patriotic. That one landed. Breyer's lips tightened. So you maintain that your appearance and statements at that forum were appropriate in both form and substance? Karoline leaned forward, her voice calm but thunderous. I showed up in my own clothes. I spoke with my own words, and I answered with my own mind. And if this hearing is trying to convince the public that quoting America's founding document in slacks disqualifies someone from public respect, then maybe the problem isn't what I wore. It's what this court forgot it stands for. Boom. The gallery exhaled like a balloon had popped. Not a gasp, a release, of tension, of silence, of truth that had been waiting for someone, anyone, to finally say it out loud. Karoline paused, then added, You want to talk about the Hatch Act? Let's talk about what happens when institutions start using rules to silence voices. When laws meant to prevent corruption get twisted to punish clarity. That's not regulation. That's censorship wrapped in procedure. Even Breyer didn't interrupt this time. Because Karoline hadn't just defended herself, she had reframed the entire hearing. Not as a violation, but as a warning. Judge Breyer had been on the bench for nearly 30 years. He'd seen impassioned pleas, filibusters in disguise, even the occasional breakdown. But Karoline Leavitt, she was different. Not because she was louder, because she was still standing, still composed, still winning the room without raising her voice. He knew he was losing this moment. And so, in one last attempt to wrest it back, he leaned in and said, Miss Leavitt, you clearly have a gift for dramatic language, but this courtroom is not a stage, and you are not here to perform. Karoline looked up slowly and smiled, not out of arrogance, but out of something far more dangerous to the powerful, conviction. She stepped forward once and said, softly but clearly enough for every reporter in the gallery to hear, You're right, Your Honour. This courtroom isn't a stage, it's a mirror. The room went still. And if my presence here feels like a performance, it's only because the people outside these walls are finally seeing what happens inside them. You called out my outfit, but what you really meant was, you weren't ready for someone like me to look like I belonged here. She took a breath. You're used to women who apologize before they speak, who shrink before they rise, who adjust their tone to make the room more comfortable. But I didn't come to comfort. I came to confront. Not with fury, not with defiance, but with the kind of strength you can't iron out of a woman just because she's not wearing heels. Silence. And then it happened. Someone in the gallery stood, then another, then more. No applause. Just standing. Still, unified, reverent. Even the court clerk, eyes glassy, stood. Judge Breyer looked out across the sea of quiet, unmoving support, and for the first time all day, he said nothing. Because what could he say? Karoline didn't win by raising her voice. She won by refusing to lower her worth. When the hearing adjourned, Karoline Leavitt walked out the courthouse doors alone. No entourage, no staffers. Just her. In the same outfit the judge tried to turn into a punchline. And waiting for her. A wall of cameras. Dozens of reporters, hundreds of supporters, thousands watching live. One journalist tried to shout over the noise, Karoline, do you feel like you were disrespected in court today? She stopped, turned, and stepped up to the podium. Her voice was steady, even, broadcast to the nation. What happened in there today wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who's been told she's too young, too bold, too confident, too different to be taken seriously. I wasn't on trial. An idea was. The idea that power only belongs to those who dress like it used to look. Flashbulbs popped. Cameras rolled. But Karoline wasn't playing to them. She was speaking through them. I didn't walk into that courtroom to make a fashion statement. I walked in because truth doesn't care what you're wearing. It cares whether you have the courage to say it. The crowd quieted. Even the cameras seemed to pause. I was told I wasn't dressed for court, but the real problem is that court wasn't ready for me. She looked into the crowd, locking eyes with a teenage girl holding a homemade sign that read, I dress like Karoline. Karoline smiled. Let them judge the clothes. We'll keep building the future. That quote, pasted on posters, printed on t-shirts, projected onto buildings. Hashtag Dressed for Truth trended in 27 countries. Even celebrities jumped in. Reese Witherspoon, Karoline just flipped the entire courtroom culture on its head. At Sheryl Sandberg, this isn't about fashion, it's about freedom. Blair Madius, she didn't walk into court, she walked into history. And back inside the courthouse, a staffer approached Judge Breyer and said carefully, "Sir, she's scheduled to speak at Harvard next week. They just moved her to the main auditorium, sold out in 3 hours." Breyer didn't answer, because for the second time that day he had no words left. The auditorium lights dimmed. Over 1,200 students, faculty, alumni, and press packed the hall at Harvard University, a venue originally meant to seat 300, until demand forced the school to move the event to its largest lecture space. Outside, more than 5,000 watched on a screen in Harvard Yard. Online, over 3 million live viewers and climbing. And then she stepped out, Karoline Leavitt, in the same outfit, the navy blazer, the white tee, no jewelry, no script, just her. The crowd didn't erupt, it didn't need to. Instead, a standing wave of silent support washed across the room, phones held high, eyes locked, not a whisper. Karoline took the mic and exhaled. "They said I didn't dress for court, but I think the problem is too many people still believe women need permission to be powerful." Applause. But not loud. Not yet. It was the kind you feel first. I didn't speak up to prove a point. I spoke up because this country is starving for courage that's not choreographed. We've been told for years to dress for the job we want, but no one talks about dressing for the truth we already live. The auditorium leaned forward. I wore what I wore because I didn't come from a tailor-made world. I came from a diner table and a single mom, from a school where you had to work to be heard, from towns where people didn't always have the right outfit, but they always had the right to speak. Then she paused and spoke directly to the students in the room. To the young woman in the back row who doesn't feel polished enough to run anyway. To the guy wearing jeans in the front, speak anyway. You don't owe this system a costume. You owe it your clarity. Silence again. And then, tears. Faculty, students, even the university president stood in the back, hands folded, head low. Karoline closed with this. "I'm not here to be liked. I'm here to remind you, power that respects only appearances isn't power worth keeping." The crowd erupted, not applause. A roar, the kind that doesn't cheer for celebrity, but for truth. That speech, played in classrooms across the country the next morning, featured on every morning show, shared in military briefings, posted in corporate Slack groups. Because Karoline hadn't just shocked a court, she'd woken a country. The congressional chamber hadn't been this full for a civilian witness in years. Republicans invited her. Democrats showed up. The media couldn't get enough seats, so they stood in the aisles, phones rolling. Karoline Leavitt, now a national figure, was called to testify on the subject of gender, professionalism, and institutional respect in federal proceedings. But everyone knew what they really wanted to hear, how one young woman turned a courtroom insult into a cultural revolution. She walked in wearing the same now iconic outfit, the navy blazer, the white shirt, slacks, the outfit that sparked a hashtag, a headline, and a movement. The chair recognized her, and Karoline began. "I was asked to testify today because someone didn't like how I looked in a courtroom. But that moment wasn't about me. It was about how America still assigns credibility based on conformity." A few senators leaned in. "Let's be clear, I wasn't on trial for breaking a law. I was being tested for breaking a mold. What I wore threatened no law, but it threatened a narrative. That power should only look like the past." One senator tried to pivot the discussion. "Miss Leavitt, what do you say to those who argue dress codes uphold tradition?" She didn't flinch. Tradition isn't defined by silencing new voices. It's defined by strengthening old values with new courage. I dressed respectfully, I spoke truthfully, and I stood my ground, not for fashion, but for freedom. The room was frozen. Even the opposition leaned back, realizing this wasn't a stunt. It was a standard being reset. Karoline continued. "The courtroom didn't collapse when I wore flats, but it did shudder when I quoted precedent. So maybe the issue isn't what we wear into court, it's that more people like me are walking in ready." By the time she finished, 4 senators had tears in their eyes. A 5th, known for voting against every reform bill in a decade, whispered to an aide, "She's got more backbone than half this chamber." By the next morning, her testimony was front page on major outlets. Karoline's revolution, from fabric to federal reform. The Wall Street Journal. She showed up, we woke up. The Atlantic, a movement in slacks and a white tee, time. And back in that courtroom where it all began. Judge Breyer requested a transcript of her congressional testimony. He didn't say why, but he read it, twice. The marble halls felt the same. Same echo, same benches, same towering ceilings. But when Karoline Leavitt stepped back into the federal courtroom that tried to shrink her, nothing was the same. This time, there was no summons, no accusation. No attempt to silence her. She was there by invitation. Judge Breyer had requested a public follow-up hearing, a rare post-review reflection session on courtroom ethics, decorum, and the evolving role of public voices in federal spaces. Some said it was a PR stunt. Others whispered it was a quiet act of reckoning. Karoline didn't speculate. She just showed up. In the same blazer, the same shirt, the same message. As she took the floor, Judge Breyer remained silent. Karoline turned to face the gallery, the same one that once stared, now stood shoulder to shoulder in support. I'm not here today to settle scores. I'm here to settle expectations. Not just for me, but for the next woman who walks into a courtroom and is asked to defend her worth before she ever defends her words. I came dressed the same way because I never needed to change. What needed to change was the assumption that respect is worn, not earned. She looked over at the bench. Breyer didn't meet her gaze at first, but he listened. So did the world. We are in a national moment where truth gets filtered, values get reframed, and strength, when worn by women, still feels like a threat. But here's what I've learned. Power that can be shaken by slacks was never power worth fearing. The courtroom didn't erupt, it rose. One by one, they stood. Court officials, press, visitors, even clerks. Judge Breyer finally looked up, and for the first time since that very first day, he spoke without judgment. Only truth. Thank you, Miss Leavitt. For the record, you weren't underdressed. We were underprepared. Karoline nodded once. No triumph, just peace. Because the battle wasn't about clothes. It was about claiming space and making sure no woman after her had to fight twice. Once to be heard, and once just to be seen.